Have you ever thought about how lucky we are to be alive right now? The world is in an incredibly stable state compared to how it has been throughout history. We don't have plagues that kill 50% of people in Europe. We don't have smallpox outbreaks wiping out entire civilizations. And we don't have the threat of a global nuclear war looming over us. Oh wait, scratch that last one. But even so, it is true that life is good right now. Things have been much worse in the past. In fact, there was only one time in history where it was safer to be in water than on land. And that's what we're going to talk about today. So let's begin in 2023. It can be hard to imagine a more dangerous place than online. There are all kinds of crazy people out there, and it seems like every day some new horror story pops up. A person gets catfished and ends up giving money to someone who they thought they were falling in love with, or a group of friends gets set up and robbed by people they met on a forum or app. These stories are crazy and scary, but as bad as it is, if you're careful, it's still pretty safe. But compare this to just 2 decades ago when the internet was still relatively new. Back then, things were very different. No one knew who to trust online. People were terrified of being stalked or having their personal information stolen. But the biggest danger was malware. If someone sent you an email with an attachment, you had to be very careful before opening it. If you did, it could contain viruses, Trojan horses, or other software designed to steal your data. This may not sound like a big deal to younger people who have grown up with internet security, but back then it was a serious problem. For example, one researcher named Von Welch accidentally opened a corrupted file in 1998 and ended up infecting her entire network. She had to shut down the system and reinstall everything from scratch. But it wasn't just home users who were at risk. Even major companies had to worry about cyber threats. For example, in 2000, it was revealed that someone had hacked into the website of the World Trade Center and defaced it with messages of hate. At the time, it was considered one of the largest cyber attacks in history. The point is that just 20 years ago, the internet was a much more dangerous place than it is now. And yet today, we're willing to let our children use it without supervision, while back then we wouldn't even let ourselves use it alone. Now, of course, things are still scary online. You just have to be smarter about it. In 1997, people didn't know how to protect themselves. They hadn't had enough experience to develop the skills they needed. But nowadays, after seeing all the scams and schemes that people have tried, we're better at protecting ourselves. So if you're careful, it's actually quite safe. Going further back, we see that things have gotten safer and safer as time goes on. For example, in the Middle Ages, being outside was incredibly risky. There were battles between kingdoms, raids between villages, pirates on the seas, and beasts in the woods. If you went outside, you might never come back. Of course, these days, we don't have to worry about any of those things. For most of us, the outside world is perfectly safe. In fact, some people have gone as far as to say that it's better to live in a forest than in a city, because there's less crime in the wilderness. But if we go back long enough, we find that this wasn't always the case. And for most of human history, it was much safer to be in the water than on the land. Before we get into why, though, we should talk about who we have to thank for the fact that we can even swim around safely these days. After all, it was only a few decades ago that sharks began to be seen as vicious man-eaters. And before that, no one dared to venture into the ocean without a cage. Today, though, we've managed to change people's perceptions of sharks, and we've even developed technologies to prevent attacks. All this has allowed swimming to become a popular recreational activity enjoyed by millions of people around the world. But until the mid-1900s, things were much different. Sharks were seen as dangerous predators, and people were afraid to go into the water without protection. This was especially true in the United States after a series of highly publicized shark attacks in the 1910s and 1920s. As a result, people began to avoid the beaches altogether, and swimming became a risky activity. But as time went on, things began to change. In the 1930s and 40s, shark attacks became less common, and people started to feel safer in the water. This was helped along by the development of new technologies, such as the shark repellent and the shark cage. Today, these devices are widely available and have made swimming much safer for everyone. But this wasn't always the case. For most of human history, sharks were seen as dangerous and swimming was a risky activity. In fact, there are many accounts from ancient times of people being attacked and killed by sharks. This is why it was so important to develop new ways to prevent shark attacks. Today, thanks to our efforts, swimming is a much safer activity than it used to be. But this hasn't always been the case. So now that we've established that swimming is actually safe, let's take a look at why it was safer to be in the water than on land for most of human history. First, we need to consider the water itself. For most of human history, water was much cleaner than it is today. This is because most of the world's pollution comes from human activities, and until the Industrial Revolution, humans weren't polluting the environment nearly as much. This meant that lakes, rivers, and oceans were much cleaner and safer to swim in. Second, we have to consider the animals in the water. Again, most of the dangerous animals in our oceans and lakes are there because of human pollution. For example, jellyfish blooms are becoming more common in coastal waters due to rising temperatures and nutrient pollution. This means that swimmers are more likely to encounter dangerous jellyfish today than they would have in the past. Finally, we have to consider the weather. Swimming in cold or rough conditions can be dangerous, but in most parts of the world, the weather is much more extreme on land than it is in the water. For example, lightning strikes are much more common on land than in water, and it's much easier to get lost or injured in a storm if you're on land than if you're in water. Of course, this isn't to say that swimming was completely safe throughout history. In fact, there are many accounts of people being injured or killed while swimming, but overall, it was much safer to be in the water than on land for most of human history. So next time you go for a dip in the pool or a swim in the ocean, just remember that you're participating in a very old tradition that humans have been doing for thousands of years. And although it may seem like we're living in dangerous times, things have actually been much worse in the past. Thank you for watching. We hope you learned something new. If you want to support us, please leave a like or comment. We'd really appreciate it. And if you want to see more videos like this, please subscribe. We have lots of interesting topics covered in previous episodes. Thanks again for watching. We'll see you next time.